I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast, the podcast where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today I'm joined by Miss Jessica Morris. Jessica is an author, spiritual director, and follower of Jesus. Her most recent book, Higher Powered, reaches deep into the soul of every reader to excavate the garbage and debris that get in the way of personal relationship with God. Jessica's honesty and vulnerability invites the reader to let it all hang out in order to take the first step into freedom from the bondage of self. And just wait until you hear her story about it. So I'd like to give a huge welcome, and I'd like to welcome Jessica to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I cannot wait to hear your story.
Thank you, Noah. It's really great to be with you this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, wherever you are.
So if you could, feel free to introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Yeah, well, my life has changed a lot over the years. I am currently not working full time, meaning I'm not getting a paycheck or health insurance. I am currently writing at home thanks to my wonderful husband who, just said to me, I have a couple years. He was saying, I was not liking my job, and he said, I'm only going to be working full time for another couple of years before he retires. And he said, why don't you quit the job and while I still have a steady paycheck and healthcare coming in and see if you can make a go with this writing ministry that you really want to get off the ground. And so that's what I'm doing, and it is amazing. And I can't even, sometimes I don't even have words to put to it how blessed I feel to be able to have this opportunity. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know if or when God will do anything with it, but I trust that it's where I'm supposed to be for today. And I also do spiritual direction on the side. That, of course, does not pay the bills. That's a very relatively new profession or vocation, I should say, for lay people. It used to be something that Catholic priests only did. And it became, I want to say, probably like in the 80s, 1980s, late 80s, it really became more for lay people, and they started to create certificate programs in seminaries. And that's where I tripped over spiritual direction. I didn't even know it was a thing until I went to seminary, and I was in seminary to really just learn. I didn't want to become a minister or anything. I just wanted to learn theology. And so I got a master's in theological studies, and while I was there, was introduced to spiritual direction and ended up adding some time onto my stay there so that I could get a certificate in spiritual direction. And I absolutely love doing that with people because I feel like the people who did that for me without even calling it spiritual direction, were put in my life by God, kind of like ordained friendships in order to get me to the next step in my life because I needed people, because for a long time I could not look directly at God. There was just too much damage in between me and God. And that's when those people were sent my way. And I look back on that in hindsight and I'm just so grateful to all of them. So that's sort of an introduction, I guess, of who I am.
One aspect of your book, and it's evident from the back cover that you experienced a not so easy childhood, and it involved mainly your father. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with your father and just how it was like growing up with him?
Sure. Yeah. My dad was a minister, United Methodist minister, and was called to it pretty early in his life. There were always a lot of jokes in his family when we would get together with family, because apparently he was a pretty bad kid and, got into a lot of trouble, I guess the kind of trouble you can get to in the 50s, and he announced to his family at some point, I don't know exactly when, that he was going to become a minister, that he felt called to be a minister. And so there were always jokes like, can you believe he's going to be a minister? This week. But one thing I know for certain in all of the disease that we lived in growing up, the dysfunction we lived in growing up, he was definitely called by God to be a minister. He was very good at his job. He was really good with people outside of our home. He was good with people. He wasn't so great with us. He was an alcoholic. And I believe there's all kinds of different ideas about whether or not alcoholism or drug addiction is genetic. I'm pretty certain it is because, it really does run in my family. Like when you look back at the history, different kinds of addictions kind of dispersed all over the place. But so he was really good at his job. And, my mom was also raised by an alcoholic. And so she was really good at being the alcoholic's wife, because she had grown up watching her mother do that. And so, and by no fault of their own, they were just doing what they had seen done before them. We all learn from our parents and the family around us. And so, um, you know, I was the youngest of four children, and at a really, really young age, my father told me that I was a mistake. We were um, I don't know, I don't remember exactly what was happening, but I remember it was just me and him in the room together. We were in the dining room where his bar was, so he was probably drinking. And I was probably being a goofball because I was the youngest of four, and that was my job to be a goofball. And he told me that I was a mistake, that my parents only wanted three children. And I remember feeling kind of like, is he joking? Is that real? And I went because it hurt my feelings. I was a little kid. And so I went to my mom to ask her, is this true? And all she said was, oh, he shouldn't have told you that. So she didn't deny it. She kind of confirmed it by her response. And so I went through the majority of my life trying not to let anyone know that, like trying to keep it a secret and trying to make sure that I was so perfect that even if I was a mistake, I actually earned my keep, And you cannot sustain that for a long time. It's just impossible. And I took to, my first memories in life are of my food addiction. From a very young age, I was stealing food out of our refrigerator and cabinets and everything, when it wasn't mealtime. And then alcohol also came into the picture for me. And as much as I, truly did use the word hate, and I felt hate in my heart for my father he was extremely abusive and violent. And I'm only going to speak for myself, not for my siblings. I saw things happen, and I can tell you that, the things that he said to me were more harmful than any beating he ever gave me. I look back on it now and I think I would much rather him get his belt out than for some of the things that he said to me, because those are the things that stay, those things that live in your brain. And they were the things that, I just assumed, I was young enough to believe that he was my dad, he was the minister. If he says I'm a mistake, then God must think I'm a mistake. And so that's kind of what my relationship was with God as well. And it was just a constant yearning to prove to God that I was supposed to be here. And that's exhausting. And so I looked to the food and I looked to alcohol to relieve me of some of that. And so that was my growing up was very much a time of trying to be seen for something more than a mistake. Now, I did have, and I look, and I do have to share this. My eldest sister, she is 6 years older than I am, and she kind of like took me on as her own. Like I think she just sort of was like, maybe put into the adult role too soon in our family, and which happens in dysfunctional families a lot. And I kind of decided I was hers. And, like she would take me with her everywhere. And when she got her driver's license, she was always taking me out. I was everybody's little sister, like I would just go with her everywhere. So I do believe that, there God gave me some relief there, by giving me a big sister who just took me on as her own. And to this day, I still consider her, my parent. I mean, she's my best friend, she's my parent. And so, um, I am really grateful for her. But, it was hard because my three siblings were all really intelligent and I was following them in school as the mistake. Now, teachers aren't saying that, and my dad only, as much as I can remember, told me that one time, but I told me every day after that, because that's what I heard him say and that's what I thought God meant. So that's what it was like. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you're younger, a quote like that sticks with you. It would stick with you for the rest of your life, and that's hard to forget because it's such a powerful thing for a parent to say, and that's kind of the worst thing for a kid to hear. So I don't. It's not surprising that it stuck with you for so long because of how powerful it was. Um, did your siblings have the same relationship with their father, or was it with him saying that you were a mistake? Did you and him have a different relationship than compared to your three older siblings?
It's interesting because it kind of, we all sort of, it's hard to explain if you've grown up in a dysfunctional family, that as you get older, everybody seems to see things differently or remember things differently. And that's one of the problems with trying to recover from it is that when I started to do the work on my childhood, there was a part of me that felt like there was something wrong with me, that I was crazy, that I remembered things this way, because my two middle siblings, they sort of I guess you could say they just when they went to college, they really never came home. They stayed at college in the summers and they did internships and traveled the world and all that kind of stuff. My older sister, who I mentioned previously, she was what they call a suitcase kid at college. Like she came home every weekend and she then moved home after college. And so she and I were there through pretty much everything. My parents did eventually divorce and it imploded all over the place. And, we were living in the church parsonage at that time. And so we had we had to move out, and it was just a big, and we were both adults at that time, young adults at that time, but it was traumatic, because we were in the middle of it. And so we have a different view of that. My sister and brother, the two in the middle, they both had children, and my elder sister and I did not. And so now, of course, you don't want to say your parents ever picked favorites, but of course they produced grandchildren. So, they were my mom was very excited about that, let's just say. And so, my eldest sister and I probably always felt like the redheaded stepchildren, I guess you could say, but really, I think all of it really was just the classic dysfunctional family. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book Adult Children of Alcoholics. It came out, I want to say it came out like somewhere in the 1980s, 1990s, and it may have been written well before that, but that's when I first heard of it and people started to really talk about it. And you could have put our pictures next to each child in the book, like we just fell right into place, and that's why I said earlier that the youngest was the comic relief. Usually the
Hmm.
youngest child in the family is the one who, ends up being the actor, out there on stage somewhere and just making everybody laugh and kind of forget about what's really happening. And my eldest sister is what would be considered the hero, the one who takes care of everything that, and hence she came home every weekend and she ended up moving home and makes sure everybody's okay, and they're just the roles psychologically that you fall into when you're living in that family. And I'm sure they would all have something different to say, and then we all do have a lot in common when we talk about our childhood, remembering, because we all did take the abuse from my father. And so it's just how we remember it is different, I think, and how it really sort of still festers for some of us or not, depending on, where we are in our adult life as well.
With him being abusive and as well as being a minister, did his actions of being abusive have any repercussions to him as a minister? Did he get in trouble or get fired from a lot of churches due to his past and learning about his abusive nature to you?
Well, we were very good at hiding it. And so now you have to remember too, I was raised in the 70s. I was born in 1970. So it was a very different time. Drunk driving wasn't even like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, I think was formed in the 80s because I think I was in high school when they formed that group. And that group really put um, like that group really put drunk driving on the map as far as laws being written and things, happening. And so before that, it wasn't I don't it wasn't the way it is today where, if you're driving drunk, you're going to end up in front of a judge who says you either go to a retreatment center or you go to jail. Like it just wasn't like that. The cops would actually escort my dad home if they found him drunk driving somewhere because everybody in the small town we lived in knew him. As far as the abuses, it was not known outside of our home. It was only things that happened in the home. And we were, like I said, my mom was really good at being the wife of an alcoholic. And so, and she was a very good minister's wife. Nobody knew what was happening in our home. And so we just all became really good at that. And the other piece too was that back then, you most people did discipline their children by hitting them. I mean that's just the way it was in those days. And so whether or not someone was abusing their child, it was um there was no cut and dry for it, the way there is today. And so, so no, he didn't. He did, however, when my mom left, because my mom did finally leave, and When was that? That was in the 90s. My mom finally left, and my dad went to the church. You'll love this story. So this is where he did get repercussions for his behavior. Um, he went to the church the Sunday after she left and honestly told the congregation that he and my mom were splitting and that she had moved out and asked for their support and love and, and all that stuff. And now I was not going to church at the time. I had left religion altogether at this point, but I had friends who were still going to my dad's church, and they told me that this happened the following week. So the very next Sunday, he introduced to the congregation his new fiance. And so, so who happened to be the woman who lived across the street from us. And so everybody in the congregation kind of lost their minds, like what is happening? Because my parents had been married for 40 plus years, and they all knew and loved my mom. And so they were just like, what is going on? And they're making phone calls to my dad's supervisors and all this superintendent and all that kind of stuff. And he ended up getting removed from his position. And he went into a tailspin with his drinking at that point because his ministry was all he had. I mean, that was his life. He had been a minister his entire adult life. And I think he lived with a cousin for a little while, and ended up finding recovery for alcoholism. And in the process of that, he wooed my mother back, and I want to say, foolishly believed everything that he said. And when they got back together, it got back to the way it always was prior to that. And they did end up getting divorced I want to say about 6 or 7 years after that, like, where she moved out and that was it. They signed the divorce papers and she had her own apartment for the rest of her life. But he was welcomed back into the church once that they got married. And then when they did get divorced, he still had his ministry. So he was removed like on a suspension basis. And then when he got sober, that, kind of paved the way for him getting reinstated. But prior to that, no, nothing. I mean, let's see, my entire growing up life, he was only moved once to one new church the entire time that I was growing up.
During that story, you had actually mentioned that you had actually at that point left organized religion. Did you become atheist during that time, or did you still have a relationship with God?
I became, no, I never became an atheist. I always believed in God. I, I always felt like my connection was Jesus. And the reason I say that is because I felt like Jesus understood me and this is going to sound really sort of backwards, but it's important that I say it because it kept me connected for a long time. I felt like Jesus understood me because his dad abused him and his dad punished him unfairly, just the way my dad abused and punished me unfairly. And that was just my childhood view of the relationship between God and Jesus. Like here's Jesus, this wonderful, loving human being walking the earth and getting people to love each other and be peaceful and all that kind of stuff. And his dad makes him die. And in the process of that, he makes him be abused horribly and crucified. Like that's what I saw. I didn't see that Jesus willingly came to earth to actually do these things. Like this was his purpose. But I saw it as this abusive relationship. And so it kept me connected to Jesus. And I always wore my cross. I always, felt very connected to Jesus. I was terrified of God though, which was really messed up. Like that's a really hard way to walk through life because I mean, but after I left my dad's church, I, I just believed that organized religion would never be a part of my life again, that I could be in a relationship with Jesus on my own and I didn't need any religion or anything like that. And I'd be spiritual. That's kind of the road I went down.
You had mentioned that you did have a recovery from addictions. Would you speak about those addictions specifically, and when did you re exactly realize that they were a problem for you and you had to get help?
Well, I was trying to get help with my food probably my whole life in regards to I can tell you that there's never a time in my life that I remember not knowing that I had a problem with food because I would look around and I saw people didn't do with food what I did with food. Like most of the time I was in secret just binge eating like crazy. And I tried to become anorexic or I tried to become bulimic so that someone would help me because there seemed to be treatment centers for girls like that. But nobody helped somebody who just had no willpower, and so I went up and down with my weight my entire life. Probably the same, like at first it was the same 20 pounds I would gain and lose like all through high school. And then when I got into college, it became 50 pounds. And then, it just kept increasing and increasing and increasing. And in the middle of all of that, I recognized that if you drank enough, like I really loved the effects of alcohol. And because it made me feel like I blacked out right away. I got to escape reality when I was drinking. Of course, put me also in a lot of very dangerous situations as I was, becoming a teenager and going to college. So, thanks be to God again that I'm alive today. I think of those days and I think, wow, how uh, how I didn't die during all of that, I don't know. Because I also, as much as I hated my father for drunk driving, I was drunk, like I would come out of a blackout and I'd be driving down the middle of the highway and I had no idea how I got there, and so here I had condemned my father my entire growing up life and I was doing the same things and I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't stop myself from doing these things. And that's the important piece of addiction is that there was nothing in me that wanted to be 150 pounds overweight. I knew that that was not attractive. There was nothing in me that wanted to be driving down the highway drunk out of my mind. Nothing about me was that person, and yet I couldn't stop doing it because it was my addiction. It was the only place that I felt um relieved of that noise in my head, that mistake noise, because that mistake noise was always there, and so I knew I guess it was in my late 20s. I was working at a job at the place where I had graduated from college, and I knew I was going to get fired. When you just know, like I just knew it's coming. And so I decided to look for a new job, because I also knew it wasn't my fault. Like that's what I told myself. It's not your fault. It's these people. They don't know how to deal with you. And so, because everything was always everybody else's fault. And I found a new job in a new town, and it was at another college, and I started working there, and I met a young, a lot of the women who were single at the college where I started working would go out together for dinner and stuff, just to, be with other single people. And one of the women there was a counselor, and she recommended a counselor for me after I told her, some of my problems. And I started seeing that counselor. And after about a year with her, she said to me, she said, Jessica, you have a lot of childhood issues that you need to work on. And she said, but you are not going to make any headway there until you get your addiction with food under control. And I was shocked because I didn't even know I was talking to her about food. But apparently, I talked to her about how I couldn't stop from compulsively eating all the time. And she sent me to a recovery program. And I started going and I couldn't believe it. I could not, as soon as I was sitting in my first meeting and listening to people talk, I knew that was exactly where I needed to be because these people were saying everything that I had done with food. And they were sitting in relatively healthy bodies around this table. Like they were, normal looking people. They looked happy, like they were enjoying being there. I mean, I was horrified and totally desperate, to lose weight. And here these people are laughing about what they used to do with food. And it was too much. And I'll never forget this and so important as I was trying to leave the room, because even though I knew it was exactly where I wanted to be, I couldn't wait to leave, like I just was like, this is way too overwhelming. And so I was trying to get out of the room, and this woman came up to me and she called me by my name, which surprised me because I hadn't mentioned my name since way at the beginning of the meeting. And she said to me, she said, please come back. I'd really like you to come back. And she looked right in my eyes when she said it. And I know now today that God was using her to talk to me because God knew I couldn't look directly at him. And that's what ended up happening to me as I continued to go back to recovery, and people would help me. They would, when I called, they would answer the phone. They would come pick me up and take me to a meeting. They would, hug me when I cried, and they would tell me it was going to be okay, and they would give me hope. And I see now that God was talking to me through all these people and giving me hope through all these people because God knew that my relationship with him was way too rocky for me to um, find him anywhere else, if that makes sense. And so that for me, it was the food was the first thing. And in that, I put the alcohol down because in that recovery program for food, there was no alcohol on the new meal plan. And so I didn't believe that I was an alcoholic because my dad was the alcoholic. He was the problem. That's how I saw it in my head, and so it took me about another year to actually admit, like I was sober for a year before I even admitted that I was an alcoholic. Because it took me a lot of sort of work through my own ego and pride and all that stuff to be able to say it out loud because I knew it was who my father was and I didn't want to be anything like him.
When you first started doing recovery, you started a lot of trying to heal from the your past abuses. How did you heal from that without having to pick up your addictions again?
Oh my, lots of meetings, lots of phone calls. I even came into it was 1999 when I got into recovery, and so pretty much nobody had a cell phone. And you're going to laugh when I say this, but the people who did have a cell phone had it in a suitcase. I mean, it was a big thing to carry around. And so, but I was taught very early on by the people who helped me that I could not do it by myself. And they were very clear about that. They said anytime that I thought anytime the thought came to me, I got this, I knew I was in trouble, because I don't have anything. What I have is a big, huge problem that I need help with. And so I just continue to reach out to people. And a friend of mine in the program gave me the name of a certified addictions counselor who worked with people who had childhood trauma. And I started to see him and ended up, after about a year of seeing him individually, he I went into one of his women's therapy groups, which was much more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Oh shoot, it just went right out of my head. Where you it's like an interactive therapy with other women, and he was there, and then we would all do our work together. It sounds crazy, and it sounds like how could that possibly work? But what was amazing is that there were some nights when we didn't even talk about my stuff, but I got so much out of what other women were working on because we all had very similar upbringings. And I did a couple of weekends, treatment weekends with him where, you're just there for the whole weekend, no phones, no nothing, and you're just like nonstop, in the work. And it took about 4 years of that. And I was able to finally sit down with my father face to face and forgive him, which was, honestly never thought that that was possible. And the fact that he was willing to sit down with me was big too, because I had cut off my relationship with him when I got in recovery because he was just too difficult for me to be around. And so the fact that he came to that, I give him a lot of kudos for that, because I know it was hard for him because we didn't have a relationship after that either. He just was not a safe person for me, but I wanted to forgive him in person. I wanted to tell him that, I recognized, the person that he was when I was growing up was not the person he really wanted to be. And I understood that now and I forgave the harms.
How was it, what the relationship between you and your father after recovery? Were y'all able to kind of heal it together? Was it, and you kind of mentioned it there, but did you still stay kind of apart from one another after recovery was done?
I wanted to have a relationship with him because he was the only other member of my family who understood recovery because he was in recovery. But what I discovered in trying to have a relationship with him is that he was what they call a dry drunk. So he was sober, but he was still behaving in all the ways that were harmful. And I so desperately wanted to be able to talk to him about these things. And I always ended up getting really hurt in the conversations because he would still use the real manipulative tactics. And after much conversation with my counselor and my friends in the program, I had a conversation with him and I said to him, I can't right now. I'm not saying forever, but right now I just can't have a relationship with you because I just keep getting hurt. And I know he was hurt by that. But I also know that I could not continue to bring myself to the hurt. You know what I mean? Because at that point, I was now volunteering to be the victim for him. And I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to be the victim anymore. And he actually ended up dying about 2 years after that. And that was the last conversation that he and I had. But I don't have any guilt about that. In fact, I feel as though I can almost, this might sound a little crazy, but I can almost feel his energy, his healing energy happening sometimes, in the afterlife or heaven or whatever anybody wants to call it. Where when I was in seminary, I had a whole new understanding from my father too, because here I am learning the same things that he learned, but at a very different stage in my life. When he was learning everything, he was 19, 20 years old and in the midst of his disease and a young husband and all that stuff. And here I was, 15 years in recovery and in a completely different spiritual mindset. And so it made me appreciate the man that he was a lot more than I ever could have, I don't think, if he was still living at that point.
How did your relationship with your oldest sister during this time? How did she help you in recovery, and what was your relationship with her like? Did it get like closer? Did it?
Yeah, you know what? She actually, the year before, actually, the couple months before I got that counselor, she came to me and she told me that I drank too much, that I like she had a mini intervention with me, and she basically said, I'm not going to watch you do to yourself what dad did to our family. I'm just not going to watch it. And I was horrified by that, because she was my connection, she was my parent, like I said. And I remember her leaving my apartment that next morning because she had stayed overnight. And that was a really awful place of desperation, because here I am now completely alone. And I think that's why I was willing to go to the counselor, because there was a really prideful part of me that thought, I'll go to this counselor and I'll show her I'm not an alcoholic. I don't need any help with my drinking. I'm not like dad. And then that counselor is the one who sent me to the food recovery program, which started the ball rolling. And so my sister, I will say this about her, I got to give her major props, because boy, does she listen well, like all through my early recovery. And she just has been the best support that a girl could really ever ask for. When I met my husband, he was really the first man. I mean, I dated a lot before him, but he was the first man that, interrupted my time with my family because I wanted to spend time with him, and I remember like being real nervous. She and I always used to watch, we're huge New York Giants football fans, and we would watch every single game together, and I would have to drive to her to watch the games that weren't on national television because she lived closer to the feed from New York. And, I remember telling her, I'm only going to come for the 1 o'clock games on Sundays. I'm not going to come for the 4 o'clock games and the night games because, I'm married now and all this. And I remember thinking, oh, she's going to be so mad. She's going to hate my husband. And she said to me, she's like, that's cool. She's like, we're always good, man. Don't worry about it. Like she just, she's very accepting of that kind of stuff. And she, like she knows, like I know that if I ever need a soft place to land, I have it. I mean, she's just that kind of person. And she's just been, in fact, in my graduation, the picture of me and my mom and my sister when I graduated from seminary, she's happier than all of us. She's so proud of me, So I mean, I think it's just she really was a gift to me, has been a huge gift to me from God.
With everything that's happened in your life and childhood, with you and your siblings, how is your relationship with them like today? And more importantly, how are you doing today?
I'm great today. I'm great today. I love being an aunt. My brother and sister, the two in the middle, my brother has two children and my sister has three. And I've just thoroughly enjoyed being their aunt. And we get together as much as we can. You know how life is when you have kids. My siblings who have children are very busy people. And so, we get together for holidays, and like last year we had my eldest sister turned 60, and so we all went whitewater rafting together with all the kids and everything because that's what my sister wanted to do. Like so we do things like that. My mother passed away in March of 2024. And the 2 years before she died, we had to take her and put her into a memory care facility because she was starting with dementia. And that was just absolutely heartbreaking. And also, the four of us came together for my mom in such a beautiful way, and for each other. When I talk to people now who are going through something like that by themselves, if they're an only child and their parent has to go through this, it breaks my heart because I often think, I don't know if I could have done that without my siblings. I mean, we all just pitched in for visits and taking care of her finances and power of attorney and all that kind of stuff that you have to do when a parent, ends up in that space. And, it ended up being really building, I think, on our relationships with each other. There's still, I think there's still some things here and there that we don't agree on, and it's like any other family, but again, if you bring up the New York Giants, we're all on the same page. Like we grew up with that's our team, and it's probably the one thing that every single one of us agrees on, absolutely 100%, and but I mean, I joke about that, but it is fun to get together and talk about the fun times because there were fun times growing up. My mother was just the greatest at holidays and birthdays and all that kind of stuff. So there are some really good memories from childhood too. It wasn't all bad.
Who, during this whole time was a huge inspiration to you, and what have been some of your inspirations in your life that have kept you going and have kept you motivated to stay in recovery and just be the person you are today?
Well, I would say pretty much anybody who's gone through recovery before me and who has helped me along the way, I dedicate my whole life to those people because if they hadn't been there, what would where would I be today? So I wouldn't pick out any one, I don't think one person there, but the counselor I mentioned, the certified addictions counselor that I was with for about 4 or 5 years, he still lives in my brain. The wisdom and the spirituality of that man was just out of this world. I did so much healing in his presence. And to this day, I can hear him saying things to me, that lift my spirit. And so him, and then there was actually right after I finished the work with him, the place where I worked, a new chaplain was hired, and he ended up becoming my spiritual mentor for about 20 years. And he was not a man who was in recovery, but he understood the addiction and the recovery thing pretty well. And ended up just being, in fact, I dedicated the book to him. He, the conversations that we had, he helped me to find my way to God not being a punishing God. He was the first, he was a chaplain, so I considered him, he was a man of the cloth. And he really was the first minister that I ever trusted in my life, like truly trusted and was able to be vulnerable with him. And he encouraged me to go to seminary and just was the dad, really like the dad that I never had, and he and his wife did not have children. In fact, it's his birthday today. He would have been 74 today. He died 2 years ago. And he and or his wife and I are having lunch on Wednesday to celebrate, his life. And they both just sort of took me under their wing and took care of me and um, lifted me up, and just gave me support. And it's people like that. My I have a very dear friend in recovery who is also a beautiful woman of Christ, and she also helped me a great deal to find my way back. And I actually, my husband and I do belong to a church today, and we do go to church, and but I still consider my recovery community sort of my main source of spiritual sustenance. Because when I go there, I get filled up with this power that I never knew existed before I found recovery. I thought I was completely on my own. And I've never been on my own. I just had to find the right people.
Your book, was it you recently came out with was Higher Powered. What can people expect when they read the book? And tell me a little bit about the title and how'd you come up with Higher Powered?
Well, I chose higher powered because, and I actually talk about this in the book because I was doing some service for one of my recovery programs, and I was at, it was the World Service Convention, or conference. And so people from all over the world who were in this particular recovery program were there. And we were talking about business. So it was, out of the norm, because that doesn't usually happen at recovery meetings. And I was seeing people just be amazing in places where they had no real talent, like um, these are not CEOs. I mean, some people in recovery are CEOs and doctors and lawyers and all that kind of stuff, but the majority of us are just, regular people go to work every day, and there's a board of trustees sitting in front of us, and it's made up mostly of members of the program. And so I was just watching them and being completely amazed by their professionalism, their countenance, the way they carried themselves. And there was this little, one of the reason we call God in the programs, we call God higher power, is because we don't want to put a name. We want everybody to be able to find their route to a higher power that works for them. So when you come in, it's not like they say you have to believe this or you have to believe that. You just have to believe that there's a power greater than yourself that is going to help you, right? And so that's the language of the program. But in there was a little gift shop of all different groups doing fundraisers, and this one fundraiser was a magnet, and it just said on it "higher powered" with the ED at the end of power. And I thought, that's fascinating. And I made that sort of like my mantra, because at that point I wasn't really sure what I believed and what I didn't believe anymore and all that kind of stuff. And so I just started calling myself higher powered. I'm higher powered, like that's how I got through life. And then when I was in seminary, the subtitle of my book is One Woman's Journey of Personal Eschatology. And I learned about eschatology, which is the study of the end times. And when I was growing up, the end times was really scary to me because I believed that meant, like apocalypse was coming, Jesus was coming down, he was going to take some people back with him, and the rest of us were going to burn in hell, and I believed I was one of the sinners who was going to burn in hell because I was a mistake, like that's so it didn't matter how much I loved Jesus. I was a mistake, so I was going to get burn in hell. And I remember learning about it and learning when I was in seminary, learning about how Jesus spoke in metaphor and symbol and parables. And I thought, I wonder if he could have been speaking metaphorically when he said he would return to the world a second time. And did he mean maybe, and it would be the end of the world? And did he mean maybe that it would be a personal return for each and every one of us? And when, like, so that the end of our world as we know it, like the end of my world as I know it, that's the second coming of Christ when he comes directly to you or directly to me. And when I thought that, I remember I was sitting in a class and I was thinking about this. I had a flashback to something that I had, a memory that I had pushed out of my mind that happened about 6 years before I got into recovery, 6 or 7 years before I got in recovery, where I was standing outside of a party, smoking a cigarette. I was all by myself and I was yelling at God. I was really yelling at God and letting him have it and tell him how much I hated my life. And, when was I going to get married and start a family and all that kind of stuff. And I went from, it was freezing cold, it was January, and I went from being freezing cold and angry to having enormous warmth and peace just sort of flow over me in this moment. And I knew with every ounce of my soul and my whole being that if I turned to my left, Jesus was standing right next to me and he was going to hug, like he was physically there. And that if I turned and looked at him, I would be able to hug him. And the warmth turned into terror. And I became immediately terrified and I ran back into the party and I ran away from him. And for a long time, I regretted that. And so much so that I pushed it out of my memory. And when I was sitting in that class and I remembered it, I was like, that was his second coming to me. He came to me to let me know he was there. And I chose to run away from him. Those years in between when that happened and I got into recovery were what they talk about in the Bible, the weeping and gnashing of teeth. I mean, it was living hell. I was so isolated and alone and lonely, and the alcohol and the food had turned on me. It was no longer fun. I couldn't get the high off of it that I used to, but I had to keep doing it. Like I couldn't stop from starting, but once I started, I couldn't stop. It was just horrible. And I believe that was my hell on earth time because once I get into recovery and started to open my mind and my heart and allow for the light to come in, that's when I started listening to people and started to follow direction and surrender my life to God and say, okay, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. And everybody's telling me I'm supposed to surrender all this to you. But where is that going to take me? I don't know. I was terrified. And at the same time, I did it because I was tired of feeling so desperate and alone. And like I was suicide. I wanted to die all the time. And I just didn't want to feel like that anymore. And everybody in recovery told me that if I followed these directions, these simple directions that they were putting in front of me, I wouldn't feel that way anymore. Eventually I would start to feel better, and they were right. And as I felt better, the more I opened to new ideas and new understanding and a stronger relationship with God and being able to pray without guilt. All those things that used to hold me back, they like slowly got chipped away, the cleaner and cleaner and cleaner that I lived my life, and the more that I surrendered on a regular basis. So that's basically what the book talks about. It talks about dying to all of that stuff, that perfectionism in me that had to die. The idea that I was somehow going to be famous or known or revered, that pride and that ego, it all had to die, so that I could be more open to my relationship with Jesus Christ. And until those things were chipped away, I couldn't completely give myself to him.
Your story is so impactful, and I really do hope that people check your book out and read more about your story because I think it's a story that needs to be shared with everyone, and it's such an empowering, very captivating story. For people that would like to check your book out as well as maybe find you on social media and your website, feel free to just promote everything about what you got going on and just promote where people can find you and keep updates about your story and just keep updates on you.
Yeah, the best way to find everything you want to know about me is at my website. It's jessicalmorris.com, which is my name and my middle initial. And I have tabs on there for if you want to find my books are there, spiritual direction, information about that, other speaking that I've done. There's links for that also. I mean, everything. And I keep that updated. And you can even contact me. There's a contact form. If you want to contact me through that, you can do that. It's all there. Like I said, I keep it updated. I also do a blog where I post a lot of poetry and other writing. And actually I'm working right now on a collection of poetry that I'm hoping to have published because I've been writing poetry my whole life, and I've just decided it needs to get collected. The good ones need to get collected together, and so I'm doing that right now. So hopefully that'll be out maybe by Christmas. I don't know. We'll see. It depends if I find a publisher that'll pick it up.
Well, Jessica, I appreciate you so, so much for coming on and sharing your story with me and promoting everything that you got going on. I really enjoyed having you on today, and thank you again just for taking the time out of your schedule to come on and talk about your book and your life. I really appreciate this time.
Oh, thank you, Noah. It's been an absolute pleasure for me. Thank you.
And to all my listeners, as I always say with all my guests, I will put off her links in the description box below. I'll put her website, social media, as well as links to her book, Higher Powered, which is out now. You can go and get that wherever you get books sold. But of course, I'll put all those links down there as well. You can catch me on my social media as well. So Instagram and TikTok, it's Lethal Venom Podcast. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube is Noah's Podcast. I just feel free to follow those if you'd like to keep updates about the podcast and just some additional stuff that I have posting on there. So you're more than welcome to check those out. And as also feel free to check Lethal Venom out wherever you get your podcast from. It's on all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, as well as YouTube and Pandora. Feel free to follow the podcast on there so you get notified when new episodes will be released. Appreciate y'all so much for joining me today and learning my learning Jessica's story, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of Lethal Venom.